discovery, Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead as he pushed through the thick jungle vines. The GPS on his phone had died hours ago, but he didn't care. This was exactly the kind of adventure he'd been craving since his boring office job had nearly driven him crazy. "Come on, just a little further," he muttered to himself, checking the hand-drawn map his grandfather had left him. The old man had been full of wild stories about hidden caves and ancient secrets. Most people thought he was just a crazy old coot, but Jake had always believed there was truth in those tales. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. Jake knew he should set up camp soon, but something pulled him forward. A strange feeling, like invisible hands guiding his steps. The jungle seemed to whisper around him, leaves rustling without any wind. Then he saw it. A dark opening in the rocky hillside, almost hidden behind hanging moss and twisted roots. His heart raced. This had to be it, the cave his grandfather had described in his final letter, the one with the water that remembers everything. Jake pulled out his flashlight and stepped inside. The cave was bigger than it looked from outside. His footsteps echoed in the darkness, bouncing off walls covered in strange symbols he couldn't read. They looked ancient, carved deep into the stone by hands that had been dust for thousands of years. "Okay, this is definitely not on any tourist map," he whispered, his voice shaking slightly. The air felt thick and heavy, like breathing through wet cloth. But he kept walking deeper into the cave. The tunnel stretched on forever, winding left and right, up and down. Sometimes the ceiling was so low Jake had to crawl. Other times it opened up into huge chambers that his flashlight couldn't fully light up. His grandfather's map showed a pool somewhere deep inside, but Jake was starting to wonder if he'd ever find it. Hours passed. His water bottle was almost empty, and his legs ached from walking on uneven stone. Just when he thought about turning back, he heard something that made him freeze, the sound of dripping water. Jake's pulse quickened. He followed the sound through a narrow passage that opened into a circular chamber. And there, right in the center, was a pool of water so clear it looked like liquid crystal. The water glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to come from somewhere deep below. "No way," Jake breathed, stepping closer. The pool was perfectly round, about 10 feet across. Ancient carvings covered the walls around it, showing people drinking from the water and changing. Their faces looked different in each carving, like they were becoming something else. Jake knelt beside the pool and stared into its depths. The water was so clear he could see all the way to the bottom, but it seemed to go down forever. Strange shadows moved in the depths, but when he looked directly at them, they vanished. His throat was dry as sand. The hike had taken everything out of him, and his water bottle was completely empty now. The pool water looked so clean, so pure. His grandfather's letter had mentioned drinking from it, hadn't it? Something about gaining wisdom and seeing the truth of all things. What's the worst that could happen? Jake asked himself, already knowing he was going to drink. Adventure meant taking risks, right? This was why he'd quit his safe, boring job and started exploring the world. He cupped his hands and dipped them into the pool. The water was surprisingly warm and tingly, like it was alive somehow. It seemed to glow brighter as he lifted it toward his lips. Jake hesitated for just a moment. The carvings on the walls seemed to be watching him, waiting. The silence in the cave was complete. No dripping, no echoes, nothing. Like the whole world was holding its breath. Then he drank. The water tasted like nothing he'd ever experienced. It was sweet and bitter at the same time, warm and cold, familiar and completely alien. It slid down his throat like liquid lightning, and immediately Jake felt different. His vision became sharper. Colors seemed more vivid. He could hear his own heartbeat, loud as thunder in his ears. The carvings on the walls started to make sense, like his brain was suddenly able to read the ancient language. They told a story of transformation, of humans who drank from the pool and became something more, something powerful, something that could live forever. Jake stood up, feeling stronger than he ever had in his life. Energy coursed through his veins like electricity. His mind felt expanded, like doors were opening in his consciousness that had been locked his whole life. That's when he heard the voice. It came from directly behind him, soft as silk and cold as ice. "You have no idea what you just became." Jake spun around, his heart hammering in his chest. The chamber was empty, no one there but him and the glowing pool. But the voice had been so clear, so close he'd felt breath on his neck. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber. "Is someone there?" Silence. But Jake could feel eyes watching him from the darkness beyond his flashlight's reach. Something was definitely there, something that had been waiting for him to drink from the pool. His grandfather's letter hadn't mentioned anything about voices or watchers in the cave. What had he gotten himself into? The awakening Jake's hands were shaking as he pointed his flashlight into every corner of the chamber. Nothing, just empty stone walls covered in those ancient carvings that now seemed to pulse with meaning in his enhanced vision. "I'm just tired," he told himself, trying to stay calm. "Long hike, weird cave, my imagination is playing tricks on me." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Something fundamental had changed when he drank that water. He could feel it in every cell of his body, a transformation that went deeper than just better eyesight and sharper hearing. Jake decided to head back toward the cave entrance. The sun would be up soon and he needed to get his bearings. But as he walked through the tunnels, everything looked different. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly, and he could read them now like they were written in English. "The water chooses," one carving said. "The chosen become eternal. Those who drink shall serve the ancient ones," read another. Jake's stomach dropped. These weren't happy stories about gaining wisdom. They were warnings, or maybe instructions for whatever entity lived in this cave. He walked faster, eager to reach sunlight and normal air. But the tunnel seemed longer than before, twisting in directions he didn't remember. His flashlight beam showed passage after passage branching off in all directions. How had he navigated this maze in the dark? Then he realized something that made his blood run cold. He wasn't using his flashlight anymore. He was seeing perfectly in complete darkness, like the cave was lit up in broad daylight. When had that started? Jake forced himself to stop and think. The changes were happening fast, maybe too fast for him to notice each one. What else was different? He held up his hand and examined it in the strange new vision. His skin looked paler, almost translucent. Underneath, he could see his veins pulsing with that same blue light as the pool. His fingernails seemed sharper, more like claws. And when he touched his teeth with his tongue, they felt different too, longer, more pointed. "Oh, God," he whispered. "What did I do?" The voice came again, seeming to float from the walls themselves. "You became what you were always meant to be, a guardian of the deep places, a servant of the old gods." This time Jake didn't bother looking around. Whatever was speaking to him wasn't physical. It was something else, something that existed in the shadows and empty spaces of the world. "I don't want to be a guardian," Jake said out loud, feeling foolish but needing to respond. "I just wanted some adventure. I want to go home." Soft laughter echoed through the tunnels, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Home? You have no home now. You belong to the depths. You belong to us." Jake started running. He didn't care which direction, he just needed to move to get away from that voice and the truth it was telling him. But no matter how fast he ran, the tunnels stretched on endlessly. Sometimes he thought he glimpsed daylight ahead, but when he reached the spot, it was just another dark passage leading deeper into the earth. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time felt strange down here, like it was moving differently. Jake never got tired, never got hungry, never even felt thirsty again. The pool water had changed more than just his appearance. It had changed his basic needs. Finally, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with his transformed body, Jake collapsed against a cave wall. The stone was warm to the touch, almost like living flesh. Everything in this place felt alive now, watching him with invisible eyes. "What do you want from me?" he asked the darkness. The voice answered immediately, like it had been waiting for him to ask. "For centuries we have slept in the deep places, but the world above grows loud and bright. Too much light, too much noise. We need those who can walk in both worlds to prepare the way for our return." Images flashed in Jake's mind, vivid as movies. Ancient beings rising from underground chambers, cities falling into darkness, people fleeing from things that had no names. And at the center of it all, figures like himself, human in shape but no longer human in nature, leading the charge. "I won't do it," Jake said firmly. "I won't help you hurt innocent people." innocent. The voice seemed amused. Look what your innocent people have done to the world. Poison in the air, plastic in the oceans, forests burning. Perhaps it is time for new caretakers. More images flooded Jake's consciousness, but these showed the truth behind the voice's words. Polluted rivers, extinct animals, melting ice caps. The damage was real and it was getting worse every day. The old gods could fix it all, the voice continued, seductive now. Clean the air, heal the oceans, bring back the green places. All we need is for the lights to go out for a while, for humanity to step aside and let better hands guide the world. Jake felt the logic of it tugging at his transformed mind. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe the world really did need saving. And maybe these ancient beings were the only ones powerful enough to do it. But then, he thought about his family, his friends, everyone he'd ever cared about. They didn't deserve to die or become slaves just because humanity had made mistakes. There has to be another way, he said. There is no other way, but do not worry. You will see the wisdom of our path soon enough. The water is still working in you, changing you. Each hour makes you more like us and less like them. Soon you will not even remember why you cared about those surface dwellers. Jake touched his face and felt the changes continuing. His skin was definitely paler, and when he ran his tongue over his teeth, they were definitely sharper. How long did he have before he became something completely inhuman? Fight it, he told himself. Remember who you are. Remember why you came here, but fighting was getting harder. The voice was right. With each passing hour, his old life felt more distant, more dreamlike. His job, his apartment, his human concerns, all seemed trivial compared to the vast purposes of the ancient ones. Still, somewhere deep inside, a spark of his original self held on. Jake focused on that spark, feeding it with memories of sunlight and laughter and all the good things about the human world. He had to find a way out of this cave, and he had to find a way to stop whatever was coming, but first, he needed to learn more about what he was becoming. The truth revealed, Jake forced himself to explore deeper into the cave system instead of trying to escape. If he was going to fight whatever was happening to him, he needed to understand it first. The voice had gone quiet, but he could feel its presence watching his every move. His transformed vision revealed passages and chambers he'd missed before. The cave was enormous, stretching for miles underground, and everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of ancient habitation. Carved chambers with stone furniture sized for beings much larger than humans, pools filled with that same glowing water, and murals that told a story spanning thousands of years. In the oldest chamber, Jake found carvings that showed the earth as it was long ago. No cities, no technology, just endless forests and clean oceans. Strange beings moved among the trees, tall, graceful creatures with luminous skin and eyes like stars. They seemed to be tending the world like gardeners, tending a vast garden. The first ones, Jake whispered, understanding flooding through his enhanced mind. They were here before humans. The murals showed what happened next. Small, primitive humans appeared, and at first the ancient beings helped them. They taught humans agriculture, art, the basics of civilization. But as humans grew in number and power, they forgot their teachers. They cut down the sacred groves, polluted the rivers, and drove the ancient ones deep underground. In the deeper chambers, Jake found more recent carvings. These showed the ancient beings sleeping in hidden places, waiting for the right time to return. And they showed the pool, one of several scattered around the world, designed to create servants who could prepare for that return. Guardians, Jake said, reading the ancient text that seemed as clear as English to him now. They create guardians to watch and wait and gather information about the surface world. He found chambers filled with stone tablets covered in writing. Reports from other guardians over the centuries describing the changes in the world above. The invention of gunpowder, the Industrial Revolution, the nuclear age. Each report noted how humanity was growing more dangerous and destructive. But the most recent tablets told a different story. They described guardians who had fought against their programming, who had refused to serve the ancient ones. Most had been destroyed, but some had found ways to resist. Jake's heart raced as he read about a guardian from the 1800s who had discovered that the transformation could be reversed if caught early enough. Another from the 1950s who had learned to block the Ancient One's mental influence. They had left hidden messages for future guardians, advice on how to fight back. The connection grows stronger with time, one tablet warned. But in the first days, there are windows of opportunity. The pool's changes can be undone, but only with the right knowledge and the right tools. Jake searched frantically through the tablets, looking for specifics. How could the changes be reversed? What tools were needed? But before he could find the answers, the voice returned, angry now. You should not be reading those, it hissed. Those guardians were failures, traitors to their true purpose. Maybe they were the smart ones, Jake shot back, still reading as fast as he could. Maybe they realized that destroying the world isn't the answer to saving it. The temperature in the chamber dropped suddenly. Frost formed on the stone walls, and Jake's breath came out in visible puffs. The ancient being was no longer hiding its presence. You think you understand, but you know nothing, the voice said. And now Jake could see a shape forming in the shadows. Tall, thin, with skin that seemed to be made of starlight and darkness. Its eyes were like black holes, pulling at Jake's consciousness. Your species is a plague upon the earth. We offer mercy by ending your suffering quickly. And what about all the good things humans have done? Jake demanded, backing away from the apparition. Art, music, love, sacrifice for others. We're not all bad. The exceptions do not justify the rule, the being replied. Besides, it's too late for arguments. You have drunk from the pool. You are ours now. Jake felt the truth of those words in his bones. The transformation was accelerating. His reflection in a puddle of cave water showed features that were barely human anymore. Pale skin, elongated limbs, eyes that glowed with inner fire. How much time did he have left? But he'd also learned something important from the tablets. The Ancient Ones weren't all-powerful. They needed human servants because they couldn't survive long in the bright, noisy modern world. They were creatures of shadow and silence, and the surface world had become too alien for them. You're afraid, Jake realized suddenly. That's why you need guardians. You can't just take over the world by force. You need us to prepare it for you because you're too weak to do it yourselves. The being's form wavered with anger. We are not weak. We are eternal. We shaped the world when your kind was still crawling in the mud. But you lost, Jake pressed on, feeling strength flow back into him. Humanity won without even knowing there was a war. You had to hide in caves and sleep for centuries. That doesn't sound like victory to me. The chamber shook with the Ancient One's rage. Rocks fell from the ceiling and cracks spread across the walls. But Jake stood his ground. He was changing, yes, but he was still human enough to choose his own path. Where are the tools? He demanded. The tablets mention tools that can reverse the transformation. Where are they? You will find no help here, the being snarled. Even if such tools existed, you lack the will to use them. Already you care less about your former kind. Already you see the wisdom of our cause. Jake wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. The voice was right. His human emotions were fading, replaced by something colder and more calculating. When he thought about his old life, it seemed small and meaningless compared to the vast purposes of the Ancient Ones. But there was still something inside him that rebelled against that cold logic. A stubborn spark that refused to be extinguished. His grandfather's voice maybe, telling him stories about heroes who never gave up, or just his own stubborn human nature refusing to accept defeat. I'll find a way, Jake said quietly. I'll find those tools and I'll stop you. The being laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You have 3 days before the transformation becomes irreversible. 3 days to cling to your fading humanity. After that, you will serve us willingly, and you will thank us for the privilege. The apparition faded back into shadow, but its voice lingered. Enjoy your last hours of defiance, Guardian. Soon you will see the world through our eyes, and you will understand that we are the only hope for this dying planet. Jake was alone again in the chamber, surrounded by ancient tablets and the weight of impossible choices. 3 days to find a way to reverse his transformation and stop an enemy that had been planning its return for centuries. It seemed hopeless, but Jake had come this far on nothing but curiosity and his grandfather's wild stories. Maybe that would be enough. He had work to do. The choice Jake spent the next day and a half searching every chamber and passage in the vast cave system. The ancient tablets mentioned several tools that could reverse the pool's effects. A silver dagger blessed by forgotten gods, a crystal that could absorb the pool's energy, and something called the Mirror of True Sight that could show a guardian their original form. But finding references was different from finding the actual items. Most of the tablets were damaged or incomplete, written in different dialects of the ancient language. Some guardians had hidden their tools before being destroyed. Others had taken them to their graves. Jake's transformation continued as he searched. His reflection in the pool water showed changes by the hour. His skin was now completely pale and seemed to glow with inner light. His eyes had darkened to deep purple, and his teeth had become sharp as razors. Most disturbing of all, he was starting to forget things about his human life. His job, his apartment, even his own name sometimes seemed distant and unimportant. On the second day, he found something promising. A chamber that had been sealed with stone blocks, hidden behind a false wall. The blocks were covered with warning symbols, but Jake's enhanced strength let him break through easily. Inside was a treasure trove of guardian artifacts, weapons, tools, and most importantly, a journal written by a guardian named Marcus who had lived in the early 1900s. Unlike the stone tablets, this was written in English, and it told the complete story of Marcus's rebellion against the Ancient Ones. Day 1 after drinking, Marcus had written, "The changes are beginning. I can see in the dark and hear the whispers of the old gods. They promise power and purpose, but I remember the stories my grandmother told me about the shadow people. I know what they really are," Jake read frantically. Marcus had been smart, documenting every detail of his transformation and his attempts to fight it. More importantly, he'd found one of the tools, the silver dagger, and learned how to use it. The dagger doesn't just reverse the transformation, Marcus had written. It can cut the connection between guardian and master, but the process is dangerous. If done wrong, it destroys both the guardian and the Ancient One linked to them. Jake's heart pounded, a way to not just save himself but to actually fight back. He searched the chamber frantically until he found it. A silver blade, no longer than his hand, covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. But Marcus's journal had more warnings. The dagger only works if the guardian truly wants to remain human. Any doubt, any acceptance of the Ancient One's logic, and the blade will turn on its wielder. I have seen what's left of guardians who failed this test. It is not a pleasant death. Jake examined the dagger carefully. It felt warm in his transformed hands, and the symbols on its blade seemed to move in his enhanced vision. This was definitely one of the tools mentioned in the tablets. But did he really want to use it? That was the problem. With each passing hour, he cared less about returning to his human life. What was waiting for him back home? A boring job, a tiny apartment, a life of quiet desperation like millions of others? The Ancient Ones offered him purpose, power, a chance to be part of something vast and important. The water changes more than the body, he read in another section of Marcus's journal. It changes the heart and mind. By the third day, most guardians no longer want to be human. They see the truth in the Ancient One's vision and embrace their new nature willingly. Jake checked his watch. Less than 12 hours until the transformation became permanent. He needed to decide now while he still could. He sat in the hidden chamber, holding the silver dagger, and thinking about everything he'd learned. The Ancient Ones weren't lying about humanity's impact on the Earth. Climate change, pollution, mass extinction. The problems were real and getting worse. Maybe the world would be better off under different management. But then Jake thought about his grandfather, who had spent his whole life trying to protect these hidden places, not by conquering them, but by understanding them. His grandmother, who had dedicated her career to cleaning up polluted rivers. His friends who volunteered at animal shelters and donated to environmental causes. Humanity had problems, yes, but it also had people who cared, people who were trying to make things better. Did they deserve to die or become slaves because others had made mistakes? The voice returned, sensing his internal struggle. You begin to see the truth, it whispered. Your kind has had their chance. Now it is time for better hands to guide the world. Better hands like yours? Jake asked. Hands that have been sleeping in caves for centuries while the world burned? Where were you when the ocean started filling with plastic? Where were you when the forests were being cut down? You've had just as long to fix things as we have." "We were waiting for the proper time," the voice replied, but there was something defensive in its tone. "We were gathering strength for the great work ahead." "You were hiding," Jake said, understanding flooding through him. "You were afraid to face the modern world. It's too bright, too loud, too chaotic for you. That's why you need servants to do your dirty work." The ancient being materialized again, its form more solid than before. Jake could see details now. Skin like polished stone, eyes that reflected no light, fingers that ended in claws. It was beautiful in an alien way, but there was something cold and empty about it. "We are not afraid," it hissed. "We are cautious. We plan for centuries, not decades. When we act, we do not fail." "But you did fail," Jake pressed. "You lost control of the world to a bunch of primitive humans. And now you're so out of touch that you think the only solution is genocide. Maybe if you'd tried working with humanity instead of hiding from it, we could have found a better way together." The being raised one clawed hand, and Jake felt power pressing against his mind. The urge to submit, to accept the ancient wisdom, to stop fighting the inevitable. But the silver dagger in his hand grew warm, and the pressure eased. "Last chance," the being said. "Accept your nature and serve willingly, or face the consequences of defiance." Jake looked at his reflection in the pool one more time. His transformation was nearly complete. Another few hours and he would be physically identical to the ancient ones. But inside, the spark of his humanity still burned. He thought about Marcus, who had faced this same choice a century ago. About all the guardians who had chosen to resist. About his grandfather's stories of heroes who never gave up. Jake raised the silver dagger, its blade catching the pool's blue light. "I choose to remain human," he said clearly. "I choose to fight for my world, flawed as it is." The ancient being screamed, a sound like tearing metal that echoed through every chamber of the cave. "Then you choose death." The final battle was about to begin. The final stand, the ancient being's scream triggered something throughout the entire cave system. Jake felt other presences awakening. More of the ancient ones, roused from their centuries-long slumber by their fellows' rage. The carvings on the walls began to glow with malevolent light, and shadows moved independently of their sources. "You think one blade can stop us all?" The being hissed, its form growing larger and more solid. "We are legion. We are eternal. Your defiance only delays the inevitable." Jake gripped the silver dagger tighter, feeling its power pulse against his transformed flesh. Marcus's journal had been clear about what needed to happen next. The dagger could sever the connection between Guardian and Master, but only if the Guardian was willing to sacrifice everything, including their enhanced abilities and possibly their life. "Maybe," Jake said, backing toward the pool, "but someone has to try." The first attack came without warning. Tendrils of shadow erupted from the walls, wrapping around Jake's arms and legs like living chains. The ancient being's eyes blazed with fury as it began to drain Jake's life force, trying to complete the transformation by force. Pain shot through Jake's body as the shadows tightened. He could feel his human memories fading faster now, replaced by alien thoughts and purposes. The pool water called to him, promising relief if he would just drink again, just accept what he was becoming. Instead, Jake drove the silver dagger deep into his own chest. The blade burned like liquid fire as it pierced his transformed flesh. But instead of blood, light poured from the wound, pure cleansing light that made the shadows writhe and retreat. The ancient being shrieked as the connection between them began to fray. "You fool!" it screamed. "You'll destroy us both." "That's the idea," Jake gasped, twisting the blade deeper. The pain was incredible, but with each drop of light that flowed from the wound, he felt more human. His pale skin regained its normal color. His elongated features returned to their original proportions. The alien thoughts in his head grew quieter, but the ancient being wasn't going down without a fight. It marshaled all its power, calling its sleeping brethren to join the battle. Jake felt their presence pressing against his mind, dozens of ancient voices demanding submission, promising torments worse than death if he didn't yield. the chamber filled with shadowy forms, each one beautiful and terrible in its own way. They had ruled this world once, and they were determined to rule it again. But Jake held on to the one advantage he had, the silver dagger that could cut through their ancient power. "You cannot win," they chanted in unison. "We are inevitable. Even if you destroy this form, others will take its place. Other pools exist. Other guardians will be created." Jake smiled through his pain. "Maybe, but I'll give humanity a fighting chance." He pulled the dagger from his chest and slashed it through the air toward the nearest ancient one. The blade passed through its shadowy form like it was cutting silk, and the being dissolved with a wail of anguish. The others hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "The blade can destroy you," Jake realized. "That's why you're afraid of it." He advanced on the next ancient one, which backed away from the glowing dagger. But more shadows pressed in from all sides, and Jake knew he couldn't fight them all individually. There had to be another way. Then he looked at the pool. Marcus's journal had mentioned that the pools were connected, a network of transformation sites scattered around the world. If he could disrupt this one, it might send shockwaves through the entire system, weaken the Ancient One's power globally. Jake ran toward the pool, dodging shadow tendrils and spectral claws. The ancient beings realized his intent and threw everything they had at him. The air filled with their screams of rage and terror. "Stop him!" the original being commanded. He must not reach the pool. But Jake's transformation had given him more than just enhanced senses and strength. It had also given him understanding of how the Ancient One's power worked. He could see the energy flowing through the cave system, connecting pool to pool, being to being, and he could see the weak points. He dove into the pool, the silver dagger raised high above his head. The warm, glowing water embraced him like a living thing, trying to complete his transformation one last time. But Jake fought against its influence, focusing all his remaining humanity into the blade. "For everyone who's going to live free lives," he whispered. "For everyone who's going to make their own choices, good and bad. For the messy, imperfect, beautiful human world." He drove the dagger into the pool's bottom with all his strength. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Light exploded outward from the blade, racing through the water and into the stone channels that connected this pool to others around the world. Jake felt the network shuddering, ancient connections severing one by one. The beings in the chamber screamed as one, their forms beginning to dissolve. "What have you done?" the original being wailed as its perfect features crumbled into shadow. "Given my species a second chance," Jake replied, pulling himself out of the pool. The silver dagger had shattered from the impact, but its work was done. The pool's water was turning clear and normal, its blue glow fading. Around the chamber, the Ancient Ones were fading too. Their millennia of preparation, their carefully laid plans, all disrupted by one stubborn human with a sacred blade. They reached out with the last of their strength, trying to drag Jake down with them. "This is not over," they whispered as they dissolved. "Others will rise. The world will burn without our guidance. Maybe," Jake said, watching them fade into nothing. "But it'll be our choice to make." The cave shook as the ancient power that had sustained it for centuries suddenly vanished. Cracks appeared in the walls, and rocks began to fall from the ceiling. Jake realized he had maybe minutes to get out before the whole place collapsed. He ran through the tunnels, his normal human vision making navigation difficult in the growing darkness. But somehow, he found his way back to the entrance just as the cave system imploded behind him. Jake stumbled out into bright morning sunlight, gasping fresh air and feeling grass under his feet. He was human again, completely, totally human. No enhanced senses, no alien thoughts, no connection to ancient powers. Just a tired, confused man in the middle of a jungle, wondering if anyone would ever believe what had just happened. His phone had signal again. Dozens of missed calls and messages from his family and friends, worried about his disappearance. Jake smiled and started walking toward civilization. He had a story to tell. And maybe, if he was lucky, some people would believe it enough to start watching for other pools, other caves, other attempts by the Ancient Ones to reclaim the world. Humanity had won this round, but Jake knew the victory was temporary. Somewhere in the deep places of the world, other ancient beings still slumbered, waiting for their chance to rise. The difference was that now, at least some humans would be ready for them. Jake pulled out his phone to call for rescue, but first he sent a quick text to his grandfather's old email address. The one that probably didn't work anymore, but felt right anyway. Found the cave, drank the water, chose to stay human. The stories were all true. Thank you for the map. Jake. Then he started the long walk home, carrying the memory of what he'd seen, and the knowledge that the world was stranger and more dangerous than anyone imagined, but also more worth protecting than he'd ever realized. Behind him, the jungle grew quiet, already beginning to reclaim the collapsed cave. Within a few years there would be no trace of what had happened here, but Jake would remember, and he would be watching. The Ancient Ones had been defeated, but they were patient. They would try again. When they did, humanity would be ready. The end, but somewhere in the deep places of the earth, in caves hidden from human eyes, other pools still glowed with ancient power. And other voices whispered in the darkness, "Soon,